Hello, my name is Joe Cartwright and welcome to my studio. Today's subject is going to be how to create the foam on breaking waves and along the edge of the sand on a beach. I'm often asked how I create the foam on these waves. This is a common question I get asked, and the answer is much simpler than it seems, so let's get started. I'll begin with a very simple drawing. Draw the distant horizon line, and then we'll draw in a squiggly line for the water's edge. I'm going to put in some rocks, and that is it for the drawing for this exercise. I'll begin by thoroughly wetting the back of my paper. This will remove the cockles on the paper and make it much easier for me to create the foam. All right, while that's soaking in, let's mix some colours. The sky is cobalt blue. We'll mix some sand colour, and that will get us started. I like to test my colours on a piece of paper before I start painting, and that'll do for the sky. And for the sand in our painting, and sand varies from location, right? But I find raw umber is a good starting point, and that'll do. Now we'll go back and wet this paper some more. The main thing with the horizon, you want it parallel to the bottom of your paper. For this painting, I'm just going to do a very simple graded wash. I'll add a bit more paint. Going to make that a bit stronger in tone. That's better. We'll let that settle in. You can make this as complex as you want. You can go in and throw in some clouds if you like. A simple technique, should you want to do so, is to get a scrunched up tissue. This will just give you some nice soft clouds. If I was making the sky more significant, I would use a different technique where I actually preserve some of the white of the paper. Not too dissimilar with what I'm going to do with the water. But here we're just creating some soft clouds. But we'll let that sit there a little bit longer. And while it's doing that, I'm going to go in and put some sand. Quick brush strokes so that I leave some untouched paper. in a broken fashion. You can see how quickly I'm moving the brush to create that effect, especially near the water. Now I'm going to add a bit more raw umber to the mixture. Good. All right, I'm now going to dry this so that I can come in and paint the water. Okay, for the water, we're going to mix the blue of the water into what's left from the sky wash. So I'm going to add some French Ultramarine to that, and some burnt Sienna that will grey it off. Now obviously different sky colours will give you a different colour for the water. Main thing is to make sure that the watercolour, the colour of the water, is darker than the colour of the sky. Okay, now when I'm painting something like this, I like to have an idea of what I want to do with the foam. So in this case I've got some foam coming in with the waves, and I'm going to make that relatively parallel to the horizon line. Obviously as it gets close to the shore these angles can change a little bit, and then I'm going to have a little bit of foam along the water's edge. The key to this is to know how to use a dry brush stroke. So we'll start by putting in the horizon, and I find by holding the brush this way gives me a lot more control. Like that. So that gives me a well-established horizon line, and notice that was just one brush stroke of my size 12 brush. Now I want to start creating some foam, and I want to break up that sharp edge. So some quick dry brush strokes, and the idea here is that your dry brush stroke is just skimming the surface of the textured paper. So this is cold press paper, and you're leaving behind the white paper. And it's better to have more white than too little, because you can always go in like this and fill some of those white gaps. Now I'll dilute that so that it's a bit lighter coming into the shore. I can paint through these dark rocks. So already we've created quite an acceptable sea scene with plenty of white foam coming in. I'm going to lightly spray this. Now I want to create a thicker mix. And I'm going to use that to throw in some undulations. And then under some of these waves, I'll drop some darker tones. quite often underneath the crest of the wave it can be quite dark. It can also be light too. And just lighten that tone a bit. And as we get closer to the shore, quite often the colour becomes a little bit more green, so I'll add some Cobalt Turquoise to that mixture. This is drying a little bit too fast. I'm going to run another brush over that. And then at the water's edge, I'll get some Cobalt Blue and use that to remove some of the foam. And soften some of those edges. I'm going to add some burnt sienna to this. The burnt sienna mixes with the Cobalt Blue to give us the impression of wet sand. You don't want too much burnt sienna, so I'm mixing it into the raw umber. More Cobalt Blue. Good. Just going to add a bit more depth to the sand. This is raw umber and some burnt sienna. Just some thicker paint. Good. Now, when we dry that, we can put in these rocks. All right, for the rocks, we'll start with some burnt sienna, add some French ultramarine to it. Maybe a bit more paint. And we'll put some more smaller ones in the distance. Take some water out of my brush. That'll do. Now, let's assume the light's coming from this direction. So we'll create a weak shadow. It's just some French ultramarine, small amount of permanent rose. Make sure it leans to the bluish violet. And we'll lift a bit of paint from the top of these rocks. Not all the way around. It's a bit too much for that one. Just going in with some thicker paint. And then quite often on a beach you'll have bits of seaweed, sticks and things like that. So when you've got a fairly plain looking area, you can get some sort of dull brown and add a bit more interest to it. Just quick brush strokes again. I'll get some of this shadow colour and under some of these ripples, because these little waves quite often have just a shadow underneath them. And as the waves get closer to the shore, the water will have churned up sand in it. So that's why I've just put a little bit of burnt sienna in there, just a quick glaze over the dry paint. It's a bit too much. And I'll bring some of that down into the sand area, just to create the impression of little puddles of water in the sand. And that helps connect the bulk of the water in with the shoreline. Alright, so now let's throw some birds in the sky. Now if you want white birds, go ahead and use some gouache. But I'm happy with just dark coloured birds. Just to sort of gently bring the eye into this area of the painting. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please give it a like, and if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please do so, and hit the notification bell so you'll be advised of each new video I produce. And if you are able, please consider becoming one of my patrons on Patreon. Your support is greatly appreciated. I look forward to seeing you for the next one.